I'm Nqandeka, as I was introduced by Nicole, and I work for Viva Agua, an organization that focuses on ensuring that all people in all places have access to clean water. We have a slogan that says, all for water and water for all, clean water. So my topic today, I'm going to be talking about food equity, landscapes and agriculture. And I'm going to be focusing more on to the village, because when you talk about food, production of food, sustainable food, we want to relate that to all people. We want to ensure that everybody has access to a sustainable planet, ensuring that we are growing towards a sustainable planet. Food equity. So when I think about my childhood, I think about my grandmother's garden, basically. That's where I grew up running around, climbing trees, guava trees, peach trees, and all kinds of fruit trees. And I think about potatoes, a lot of potatoes, because my grandmother grew potatoes. I love potatoes to this day. And there is no better way for me to explain food equity or food security. It was access to food as a child. It was my grandmother and my mom and my parents ensuring that we have food in a community that doesn't always have food, right? But my grandmother dies when I'm 11 and my mother has to move out. We live in our own property and I face poverty in a way because my mother has a cleaning job in a local town and grandmother is not there to grow food. It's like, wow, what a shift, what a move. And for a few, maybe years or 2 years, we face kind of an exposure to poverty where you're left with a meal or mosho and you're like, what am I going to do with it? But my mother, I think at the back of her mind, she has my grandmother's grooming and she saves up money and she starts fencing and she grows food. And we're back to normal, And that's where the love for food production comes from for me. Right? And then from there, I go to high school, I study agriculture, varsity, I study agriculture, and fast forward to now, I'm still talking about food. But if we are to talk about food production and food equity, food security, we have to look into people's livelihoods, for example, in the villages. We don't just want to talk about, access to food in the city set up where we can become vegan, vegetarian, but as Carl said, it's not very sustainable if it can't reach a normal person. It's a certain class of people who we are talking about. But what does it look like in a village, right? So we're coming from a history of food production. My grandmother's time, where they were growing food and planting. It was livelihoods, planting and growing food and animals. But at this moment, it's not the same. Things have changed. And that's affected by a change of people working in towns and access to social security, people just getting that money and you can buy one cabbage and you can go through a month and you can just buy food, meat or something like that in spaza shops and everything. There's a change of diets, right? And also there is as a result of that, people not growing food and not using the soils, our soils have degraded a lot. I think when someone drives through Eastern Cape, you can see the landscape. How does it look like now? There's a lot of dongas, there's a lot of open spaces, no soil cover and all that. That has affected our soil fertility now. That means the few people that are producing, it's not the same as back then, right? So you say, okay, you have a problem with landscape, there's erosion, there's degradation. What do? We plant trees, right? We want to cover up. But again, when you look into that, there's beliefs and there's habits around trees. For example, in my villages, when you talk about trees, someone sees firewood, someone sees building material, someone sees clutter at the same time, right? Because some people are like, I don't want trees very close to my house. There's going to be snakes, there's going to be insects that I don't like. I'm not really sure. You can keep them somewhere there, right? But you want them close so that they restore the old fields, the old gardens and everything. So how do we deal with that? How do we deal with the beliefs? For example, there is it's true, right? In my villages, there is a belief that you can't plant a coral tree in your property because basically they cause people to die. That's the belief. Like when you see a property with a coral tree and there's no adults there, like that tree killed those people, that kind of thing. And there's also trees you can't plant in the property. There are trees that are designated for people with twins. It's called Msenge. It's Euphoria, the spiky tree. You can't plant that. You can't just say, okay, I'm rehabilitating my property. I'm just going to get few euphorbias and coral trees. So there's things to consider if you are moving towards rehabilitation of spaces in the villages. So in doing that, that means in rehabilitating, you have to involve the people. You have to talk to the people. What type of trees, indigenous trees, what can we do? But again, there's animals involved in the properties, right? There's animals around, so if you're really coming to say, okay, I have 500 trees for this village, everyone is going to plant and everything, people are going to plant. Yeah. Wait until the next harvesting season. Animals grazing inside, and that dynamic. So what do you want to do in those cases? So when I was talking and we're thinking about what ways can we use to rehabilitate, to plant trees, to reforest spaces in the villages, it is the use of agroforestry, which is planting of food trees, like fruit trees, nut trees, and then in between you plant crops that people can eat in between while they're waiting for the trees. And also at the same time incentivizing planting of trees. For example, if a family plants 10 trees, you can incentivize at the end, say, okay, how many trees have survived out of the 10? And out of the 10, you pay people for what survived. It's not really like a lot of money, but it's to encourage them to know that this is money to them, because you're talking about spaces where money is the problem. It's people who don't have access. So if you're incentivizing them, they'll take care of the tree better. It's a win for you because, okay, we have those trees, it's rehabilitated, the villages are getting better. And you can use fruit trees because people take care of food crops in general in the villages. So if you're planting fruit trees, they'll take care of them because it's food at the end of the day. So you're incentivizing and they are growing food in the next few years, and then you can slide out of incentives and go to the next village like that. So they are growing food and you're capacitating them, It's not totally taking them out of poverty per se, but at least you've tried your best, and you're working with the beliefs, with the habits, with the culture, and ensuring rehabilitation. Because normally when tourists come, I live in Mulongola, there's a lot of tourists. When tourists come, they say, oh, this village is too dry. I mean, there's no trees, there's no soil cover, there's nothing. But it's like, but what are the factors that affect that? Do you want to work with that towards a more rehabilitated space, So you're not, okay, you've given these people a freedom to produce their own food and everything, because we know that in the sub-Saharan Africa, but 70% of people depend on agriculture. But there's a problem because there's no water. There's not enough water for that production, right? So how do we also look into water? I mean, you cannot separate agriculture or food production with water and energy. So how do you look into ensuring that there's enough water? Okay, we have rainwater harvesting, and which can be used to encourage people to produce. And when you plant trees, you are sequestering carbon, right? You want to ensure that you capture the carbon in the atmosphere and into the trees. And in carbon, there's what is called carbon credits and all that. And there's also an equivalent in water. There's what is called water neutrality, whereby participant or people who use the water sustainably. They reduce the quantities of the water that they use. And in that way, they also make sure that they use, they invest in ensuring that there's clean water. So there is a link between carbon credits and water credits or water neutrality, whereby, for example, say, okay, Viva con Agua is a water organization. We're focusing on ensuring that there's clean water. And then Greenpop focuses on planting trees. Where we live in Mulongola, there's a beach and there's a lagoon and everything, and mangroves have died. So imagine if Greenpops comes and we plant these mangroves. They're not only it's not only rehabilitation or planting trees only, but it's also cleaning the water. because again, water neutrality ensures that less quantities of water used. And the other aspect of it is ensuring that the water is clean. So if you're cleaning the water, then you are restoring the water life, the marine life, ensuring that there's fish and other species that live in the water. So there's always a link between trees and water, and that's where Viva con Agua is looking into linking with Greenpop and ensuring that we create this harmony, this movement, carbon credits and water neutrality or water credits, and that also now looks into ensuring that people in the area have food, because it is food to them. If you can create this cycle, this triangle, whereby you plant trees, you restore the water, you ensure the sustainable use of water, and then you ensure that people are planting, there is a continuous benefit. So in closing, when we think about food equity and people accessing food, we have to think about the reality that there's so much shift in people's diets in the villages. Like, people now just go to a spaza shop and buy a cheap meat called soup pack, And I've observed that growing up in the villages, there's been a huge shift. You see less and less and less of green on the plate. Because people are, I can go buy soup pack and cook it in 15 minutes, cook it with pap or cook it with ngosho. But how sustainable is that? Because now you're seeing obesity in the village. Like, children are starting to be obese, which is nothing usual in the village. So how do we go back into that space? How do we go back when we're reforesting? How do we ensure that there's food? Because in spaces like this, you can plant trees like normal trees, not food trees. But in a village setup, you need to ensure that food equity or food security is improved and there's nutrition. And we talk at Greenpop, we talk about a shift in diets. It's a thing in villages and townships. The diets have shifted towards a more an unhealthy spectrum because of the fast foods and everything, and the disappearance of gardens, disappearance of green on the plate. How do we make a holistic and a sustainable reforestation program or set up a project that caters for townships and villages or low income spaces? Thank you so much.